Good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to our panel talk on transforming India through disruptive design. This panel discussion is part of our campaign where we are, promoting our innovation challenge, which is Dell Designathon, India's first innovation challenge focused on encouraging design-led innovations to disrupt some of the pressing issues around sustainability development goals. And as part of our challenge, we have identified three tracks, which we want to change. And the idea of this panel is to understand, the impact that design-led innovations bring when we are looking at social issues and social impact as, a sector where we would want to um, make bring a change in the lives of citizens as at large. So on the panel today we have four amazing personalities. In their own capacity, they have been doing a lot of work around promoting design led innovations and also working in this sector of sustainable development goals. So I'll start off with introducing the panelists and would request attendees to use the chat window to put in your questions. At regular intervals, we will pick up those and try to address them during the panel. So, firstly, I would like to introduce Taha Malik, who is the founder of Bari Labs. He has a global experience of around 13 years working in multiple organizations. He also has an experience in founding a health tech startup, Aurobind, which was later acquired by Amazon-backed company House Joy. Currently, as a founder of Bari Labs, his main role is to follow his passion to promote design-led um, conversations around physical products. He has a team of designers, engineers, and marketers where they look at innovators and entrepreneurs and help them bring their ideas to life. Bari Labs, Taha, correct me if I'm wrong, it's in Indore.
Yes.
All right, great. Um, Next on the panel is Hanisha Vaswani, having uh, a wealth of experience around UN SDG work. She has around 14 years of experience in building and running scalable businesses as well. She has been associated with the UN SDG as well, where her main program was a World Food Program, where she supported startups in nurturing them in that program. She also is a founder of Majority Fund, an early stage investment team that looks at startups around, which work on livelihood improvement, emergency response, supply chain, nutrition, fintech, and agtech. Hanisha, thank you for being with us. Next on the panel is Pradeep Kumar. He is a Chevering Fellow at the University of Oxford. Over 20 years of experience in innovation and open innovation, working in diverse industries and functions. He is also an avid book writer. He has written books in Tamil and also has a startup, that sells Tamil ebooks. So I think when it comes to inclusivity, how vernacular language is an important area that we could all look at. He also has a passion for teaching and has delivered many training programs to corporates and campuses, more than 10,000 students. Pradeep, welcome on the panel today. So, the fourth panelist in our talk today is Prathap Raju. He is the managing partner at Climate Collective, and again, a person who has wealth of experience in the sustainability space. He has been working with many entrepreneurs and innovators in the space of sustainability, climate action. Um, I have personally been in touch with Pratap and his team since a few months back, and I've seen their work. He also runs. I mean, they are. I mean, Climate Collective is also is also having a venture arm, an impact fund, where they look at startups in the sustainability space. Um, so that was a quick introduction to all the panelists, and just setting the context of today's topic, transforming India through disruptive design. Um, India has been in the forefront of disruptive technology. It has been embracing technologies, and we have been recognized globally to do that. And in the last few years, we have seen a huge traction, especially with our startup ecosystem growing at an emphatic pace, and looking at the growth and the innovations that have come up. I think this was about the right time for us to even look at not just the tech side of disruption, but also the design side of a disruption, um, and how design led innovations can help us tap into the problem areas where a lot of issues and noise have been created on how unsustainable some of these technologies are, and how it's not creating the real impact, and how social impact should be kept in mind when we are thinking around developing something new. um, so Pradeep, maybe we could bring in you first. You have 2 decades of experience, especially I think in the fintech space. If I may ask you, as an individual, when large companies look at launching their products in the market, yes, there is a target audience in mind. There is a definite roadmap. But when it comes to looking at design, what has been your personal experience in working on ground? How do you make a fintech platform inclusive? Or maybe if you could throw some light on that.
The first thing that I was about to say was it is always good and far better to kind of define, hey, who are all your audience, right? And or the target segment as we call, right? Then once when we kind of define the audience, we could always kind of think about, hey, what would be the edge cases and what could be the the off scenarios or the on scenarios that would impact a certain section of the audience or certain section of the target segment, and how exactly we could kind of focus on them and help in them, right? Even if you don't consider that kind of a thing, there is certain thing called as an accessibility guidelines for your mobile apps and as well as for your web tools. Consider that we're talking about an proper tech solutions that goes on either on a computer or on a laptop or on a tablet or a mobile. So there are certain basic accessibility guidelines, and all you have to do is kind of bare minimum you have to stick to the accessibility guidelines, right? Because sometimes, most of the times, what people think is, hey, design is cool, so let me kind of play around with the coolness factor. Most of the times design is not all about the coolest factor, but it is all about how utilitarian it is and how exactly it impacts the end user for it, right? See, there are a couple of other examples which we can think from the Indian context, right? Think about how Paytm has put up a speaker. As soon as you make a payment, it kind of tells that, hey, this is the payment option or this is the amount that people have paid for you in the UPI thing. In my opinion, that is a very cool thing, because you actually need not take your mobile and then show it to somebody else, because the person may or may not be able to read, and the screen color, the screen resolution might, or the brightness level might have an impact and so on and all that. But whereas whenever it kind of makes a sound that it is out over there, then it really helps the people. But I think still it could go further one bit, because I have seen that it usually kind of tells the amount that we have paid usually in English but not necessarily in the local language, which could also be much more helpful if it starts talking about it, the money aspect of it or the amount that we paid in the local language as well. So when you start thinking about your end user, and then what would be the context or what would be the environment that they would be using it, once when you start factoring all those things, then I think the design becomes a little bit more easier and much more user friendly, right? So just to kind of sum up, think about your end user, end audience, and then kind of define them. Think about the edge cases, or think about the very rare scenarios that would really be impacting the end user, At the same time, think about the 20% of the users who may or may not kind of contribute, but that is your long tail of the users, right? Then stick to the accessibility guidelines for the web, mobile, and all the other aspects of it. And as always, like, think about, hey, what is the context and the environment that they use, right? Of course, there are other examples. I would even go venture beyond the fintech. The other example that I would say is, think about the FB Lite that they use, right? They thought, hey, Facebook may or may not be, everyone would have a good internet connection and they would have the latest mobile. So let me put up an FB Lite platform, which is much more smaller. That really helped to the Facebook to expand to the larger places. And even we could think about the example with the Netflix as well. I'm just taking popular examples that many people would be familiar with, so they could understand and correlate, right? So even Netflix says that, you know what, I will kind of give an app or give a kind of a way to Netflix mobile only. So which means the price becomes cheaper, and then, like, it becomes faster loading, and the screaming and the buffering and all that becomes much more easier with for the people in the developing nations and the developing economies where the net speed may not be much more higher. So that is what I talk about, the environment which you operate. So I think if only if people start thinking all this kind of an aspects predominantly from the end user perspective, I think design becomes much more easier. More happy to have if you have any follow-up questions, or if you want to kind of double click or deep dive on any. Hope that helps.
Hanish, I would like to pull you in here, because see, I think when we look at the startup ecosystem per se, technology comes natural to all of us. In fact, a lot of our initial approach, to starting off as a business in the startup space is to say that, just have some tech in place and launch the product and then keep improvising and evolving it. But I think that's where design is not kept in mind when it comes to working on certain SDGs. So if you could, give us some examples from your experience, how I mean, what you saw when you've been working with the UN SDG, and what is your personal opinion about having that initial thought process in place when it comes to making some innovation around social impact?
Sure. So, Rahul, thanks for the opportunity. See, most importantly, the SDGs don't exist in a vacuum, right? Like it's something that we need to achieve as a society. It's a set of goals that we've set for ourselves as a society. And to that extent, I mean, we have to, in some sense, if the SDGs are a goal, and this is where we are today, we have to collectively, as you know, people in the startup ecosystem, people in the corporate sector, figure out ways to get there, and technology is a means to get there. So I mean, in some sense, SDG focused design is no different from regular user centric design. The only key is, as Pradeep mentioned, you have to be extremely conscious about your users' current situation and your users' current needs, capabilities, etc. I mean, I can give you an example from the private sector. Before working for the World Food Program, I was with the Tata Group. I worked at Tata Click. And even then, I mean, even in urban India, we have connectivity issues. Even in semi-urban, even in pockets in urban India, we have issues where people can't read very well. We don't have to go to a remote village to find those issues. I mean, in Vikhroli, one stop away from IIT Bombay, the internet connectivity sucks. So that's where we start building the PWAs, the light versions of apps, so that somebody with a spotty internet connection can still work. And that's where on the design side you try to handle things. Say, hey, I mean, can we still make this app work, make this software work, even if the internet connection is coming and going? What do I need to do to store at the device end, etc. But what does happen, the stuff that you need to take care of. So, for example, the assumption that the device that is being used is either a shared device or a lower cost device, so it has lower capabilities. So, for example, a low cost device usually has space for about 3 apps, give or take. Okay, so we have seen this. I've previously worked at Airtel. We've seen this. You will see a lot of uninstalls and reinstalls in devices like this. So, as a product manager, as someone who's managing an app like that, don't get disheartened by the number of uninstalls you get. It's not a sign of somebody hating your product. They may come back. So, because they only have space for about 3, unless you find yourself being that useful that you are one of those 3, you may find that the app is getting uninstalled and reinstalled. So one will usually be WhatsApp. One will probably be a payment app, because both of those are probably their means of living. WhatsApp is more outward marketing, people sending them orders, etc. A payment app is to receive payments. The third app, you really have to earn that third spot. So in terms of usability, that usability has to be strong, the value proposition has to be strong. The second is low literacy. You have to define, even if they are able to read certain numbers, etc., whether if you can make it as low literacy sort of compliant as possible, that's great. The third is the assumption that the internet connection is not always going to be great. So the lowest amount of internet that you use, the better off you are. Which is why apps like ShareChat have done well. There were apps that allowed for proximity sharing, etc. And lastly, so off app, what's the effort that the person is required to do? For example, I can give you a couple of examples from the field. So if, for example, we are asking healthcare workers to upload the nutrition data of we've done this with an app, okay? We asked people, we wanted to call in for data from the deep field, like from remote districts, we wanted to know nutrition data. So in the last week, so every Friday, a healthcare worker has to upload a list of children who've come to the clinic. Now, nobody's going to sit and type that. So eventually we had to make an app that could do handwriting recognition. Because they're writing in their registers, you just like an AI app that could you take a picture of the register and just send it to us every Friday. So you have to understand their current process and meet them where they are. It could also be, you may require not only to solve this with a technology intervention, but add a human element to it. So if, for example, the person is just not able to get technology, you may have to put in a secondary worker, a person. So in agricultural cases, these are called extension workers, etc. You may require a young person from the village who's more educated than your end user to actually help them digitize the data, for example. So that design doesn't have to be technology only. It has to be a process design, not just a product design. That's something you do have to keep in mind. I think I'm done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anisha, for the initial thoughts. I think a lot of probing questions may come to you soon. All right. Prathap, I would like now you to coming in from this space around sustainability. I am personally aware about your work. What has been your experience, when you look at startups working in a global issue like sustainability? Everybody knows about it, everybody reads about it, they are aware about it, but are we seeing that conscience and awareness within entrepreneurs? And how has been the space when you look at innovation per se?
Right. Thanks, Rahul, and thanks for the opportunity here to speak here. I have worked with a lot of clean tech startups. Something has happened when I started in 2016. Clean tech was not a area many entrepreneurs were playing around with in India. I think I estimate 100 startups maybe back then. Our research, we estimate about 2,500 clean tech startups today, and that's a massive jump. And if you look under the hood, it's even more that's coming out. So it's a nascent industry. So people are working, and it's quite exciting time. And clean tech is not a specific tool. It's almost more of a transformation. We're going to see this generic term clean tech being applied to industries, on most industries. And we're not just talking about, of course, climate change, energy, carbon, but also when we look at areas like circular economy, our extraction from nature. So it's been quite amazing, and that's not unexpected. We have so much talent here in India. I'll give you two examples, though. When it comes from a design point of view, the first one, similar to what Anisha was talking about, design thinking and these principles are not different for SDG. There was this great microgrid that I saw being developed in Berkeley. This was at the beginning, 2017, and it was for India, Asia. And I was talking to him, and I went back, and I knew someone at the Nodal Agency for Renewables in Hyderabad about microgrids. And he said, the biggest problem we have, at least operationally, is people stealing the copper wires. And this was not something that was built in Berkeley Labs. I mean, that was a great solution. It was just not a solution for that part of India where if you're not thinking about the context, the environment, all the stakeholders, you're not going to be designing a solution that is implementable. And then, okay, that's a general principle. I'll give you another one that I think very interesting and where we can start thinking about design. There was a study on the efficiency of engines in Spain over a 20, 30-year period from a CO2 emission point of view. And engines have become amazingly more efficient over time. Yet per car, CO2 emissions increased. Now, how is that possible? Well, our cars got bigger. I mean, that's pure and simple. And there's, of course, other factors from multiple cars versus single cars in a home. So sometimes when we think about an SDG goal, an impact goal, as opposed to a product goal, it may not overlap. You know, it's kind of a paradox of efficiency. A lot of clean tech is about efficiency of resources, which may have that paradoxical response of more consumption as a result. So that's where design thinking, if we really are designing for a goal that we want or need, should come into play. It's a tough thing to do because we are entrepreneurs, the ones who are working in startups. We're not system movers. We don't have that levers or power that even governments don't have. You know, you're talking about, consumer values or that influence many factors when it comes to consumption. We're talking about, profit motive of companies that may be going against this need for design that may limit sales. I mean, these are hard things. How does a stock market react to that? So I think when we start thinking about design, we need to start thinking a little deeper. One, we also have to recognize that when we're designing for impact, especially in sustainability, maybe in others, that some of the stuff that we really need to do or probably is good may actually be much harder than we think. And it's not a product innovation. It's something that requires a deeper involvement of stakeholders. I think over the panel here, we'll get into that a little bit more. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Prathap. Very interesting insights there, because yes, you are right. The profit motive is there, and not just with corporates, but also with startups, because they have to start from somewhere. And all of us know how painful it can be for entrepreneurs when the journey is, fairly long and fairly uncertain as well. Taha, I think the right time for you to come in. I think you have been, working directly with entrepreneurs on ground. Could you give some insights of what has been your experience in this space and how things are right now, and maybe throw some light on how a challenge of this nature, challenge when I say the innovation challenge or any challenge for that matter, does it really excite entrepreneurs to participate? And so could you just cover these areas?
Thank you for organizing this platform. I think it's a great platform for us to talk about design and the importance of it, because we all being founders, or we all having very closely worked with founders, we understand that there's a common gist in terms of solving problems and the passion towards solving problems, right? But at the same time, this time is not just about problems, but a smarter way of a right way of doing it. I think that's why the design principles have been really effective and important. And from what SDG is all about, right? I think it's all about being inclusive and being able to create things for everyone around, right? And I think that's where the biggest opportunity is, honestly, at Biolabs also. So we basically are a hardware tech startup studio. So we talked about a lot of apps and designs over here. I'll focus more on the hardware side of it, because I think that's where, again, a massive opportunity is, right? And along with the massive opportunity, there's a very big importance of design, where when you're building a product out, how do you understand your users? Because the cost of fixing things in a hardware is very high, and the time it also, as compared to a software, right? And I think that's where understanding of the end users, understand the requirement, is very important. And then secondly, there is also just the needs are so big, right? I think SDGs is a great example, because that's an area where there hasn't been traditionally focused on, right? We generally try to build apps for everyone, right? And it is always, when we try to build apps for everyone, it is these corner cases, the people who have been left around, right? That's where the biggest opportunity now is, because for us to create an impact, to understand them and to build for them, becomes very important. But I think that's what we have been seeing a lot of such startups coming up. We have been very closely working with startups from, let's say, the inclusive space, people working with old age, people working with blind, well, deaf, and there's just amazing innovations happening over there, right? Be it both app side or the hardware side of it as well, right? And I think that's what excites us, that people are now thinking, people are now looking at those problems. They're spending their time with those people, understanding their needs, and then coming back and thinking about, hey, how do I now design a solution, right? I think that fundamentally what even Pradeep and Harish talked about, understanding users are very important, and the more we stay with those people whom we are trying to build a solution for, right, the better we understand. Of course, majority of us, we always think of a problem from who we are seeing and who we are meeting with, right? But we're trying to create or solve problem for people that we don't really know that deep of. I think it becomes even more important to do that, right? I think design in general as a principle is where the world has moved on, right? There is no more a time where just getting a solution from A to B is enough. How that experience the solution creates is very much important, right? And that is where the stickiness, that's where the longevity with that solution also comes in. To Hanisha's point, if your solution is not adaptable to the end users, they will not use it. And I think that's not just from a design of a looks perspective, but the entire experience of how they're using it, right? And if they feel it's not happening, they will move on. I think that also creates an opportunity for new startups to come and see where is that gap and build, as well as the startups who are building it to be able to build it in a way which incorporates that part out, right? In general, I think there is also, like, from a funding perspective, I know I've spoken to Anisha also a lot of times, right? There's a lot big focus on impact, right? We do see a lot of the incubators, government programs, investors coming in, right? Earlier it was always all about, hey, what's the big buzz that we're making it? But there's another segment going on which is all about impact as well. And there are, really big people who are funding it, supporting it, be it institution level, be it a personal level also, right? So I think it's a good time where the problems are huge, the opportunities are huge for people to take on these problems. There is amazing recognition, right? Just this year in France, we had at least 4 to 5 startups who were representing India, presenting their solutions, right? And most of them basically had an impact to it. And that's what, the world is also recognizing over here.
Yes, Taha, I completely agree with you. I think a lot of, and this is in surprisingly and very encouragingly, we are seeing this coming in from incubators, students who are thinking around those. I think that grassroots level connect where these youngsters are, I think it's a good thing, is a very positive sign that people are more aware and they are more conscious of the fact that we need to work on those problems. And that's what actually even excites people like us, to just keep going, making them, giving them the platform, enabling them. So that way, I think, yes, we are. I think the focus is very important here. So I think, Pradeep, coming to you again. I think looking at the initial conversations, I think all of us agree that I think there are some infrastructure issues which trigger innovations, not necessarily design per se. So I mean, things like a simple thing like how a poor internet connectivity can create opportunities even for people like Paytm and Netflix to come up with something which just keeps people going, just not lose them out. But going a little further, do you see these teams, these engineering teams, looking at all right, we're trying to solve a problem right now as is, but in the long term, how is it going to be financially viable? And is it possible to just keep iterating, keep evolving the existing solution, or I mean, do we need to take a pause, look at things from a long-term perspective, and then try to come in and change things. So have you seen this approach coming in, or what are your thoughts on that?
Sure, right. See, one thing that I would quickly comment is, what, it is all kind of interrelated, and then has an cyclical loop or an circular loop, if you want to think about it, right? One, it is not necessarily the infrastructure per se that makes a big difference, or plays only a critical role, right? Take for example the platform that we use. For us even to kind of change this isn't very simplistic user perspective that we are trying to change the background. And even for this, we kind of think, hey, you know what, come in, I'll kind of help you or walk you through with it, right? Like, we all of us have been working with the tech, and even for us it is little bit challenging, or it is not necessarily that intuitive, right? So in fact, the good design is also not only taking care of the infrastructure and then thinking about it in a very different way, that, oh, you know what, probably the internet might go down, and if that is so the case, then I will change the bit rate to this extent, to that extent, so that it works that way. So it's not just about the infrastructure per se, it also about how intuitive and then how easy it is to use, right? It goes back to how Anisha was also mentioning that, hey, you know what, people are kind of uninstalling it or not happy with it or not continuing with it for so and so reason, but there are other reasons and all that. So I think the design, or the way that how you define design, plays a very important role in all these aspects of being sustainable as well, right? So again, it goes back to in terms of how are you kind of making it sustainable, and that is not necessarily only from an end user perspective, but it is also on the organization perspective, right? Like, say for example, people who run the big data centers, they are thinking about, hey, how do we kind of reduce the whatever the impact that I'm creating on the economy, I mean on the society or on the climate, depending on where I run the data center. So let me kind of put the data center in a much more better place where it is not affecting the climate. At the same time, it is also bringing down the cost as well, right? So that is one of the reasons why I would say that, what, everything is interrelated and everything has kind of a flywheel effect. So how you design your app from the end user perspective, not necessarily from the infrastructure or on the environmental perspective, but also the design on how user friendly it is, or how intuitive it is, or how exactly it is helping the end use cases that you would use, and how are you kind of helping them to do the very basic functionalities that your app or your solution or your product is intended to do. That is one. And at the same time, once when you scale, and how exactly it would be sustainable, that is not necessarily from the end user or from the product perspective, but that also depends on how the organization is looking at the thing, right? Like, say for example, think about a big company like Amazon. How do they do packaging, or how do they kind of send it, or can they club the orders together that kind of delivers at the end of the day whatever that you ordered? So even small triggers like that, and could make a big impact once when you operate on a huge scale, is the way that how I think about it. That will contribute to the sustainability, right? Like, say you make 4 orders and you know that it all has to come down to you. Can Amazon club all the orders that gets delivered, and then can they put in the same package, and then can they optimize the package? And then let's say that you have a lot of cardboard boxes that is lying out, can you start thinking about, what, hey, when I go back, can you give me back those kind of things and then take it back? So how do you make the small changes, because all of this adds up once when you operate in such a huge scale. So that is something that companies and the individuals can start thinking about it in our very own ways as well.
So Anisha, I would like to bring you in here, and changing your hat as an impact investor. When you evaluate startups, so where do you see um, the power of taking this call as to, I mean, like what Pradeep was mentioning about that, as an organization, they take a call as to where the changes or the tweaks are required. So is it coming in from the engineering team, or is it coming in from the founding team, or is it the product designers themselves who may trigger this thought process within the organization? If you could throw some light on what you have experienced as an impact investor when you evaluate startups.
Sure. Um, First of all, disclaimer, very young startups sometimes don't have three distinct teams. Like a product design team and an engineering team and a senior management is a luxury. It's probably two
Yeah.
folks sitting in a room and coding this. So you're doing this without even realizing you're doing it.
Hmm.
So early versions are often just two people sitting, figuring out, okay, here's a problem that we want to solve. Okay, and here's the first solution. See, when we evaluate teams, the first thing we look at is bias for action. Like, they should like the problem that they should deeply care about the problem that they want to solve, and then they should have made some attempts to go and solve it. So, for example, I met one of the founders of S4S at a conference a little while ago. S4S does solar dryers. I don't know if you know of them. And she was like fairly straightforward. They were a bunch of 6 friends coming out of college, and they said their starting point was, we don't want to go work for a large organization. We want to solve a problem, some problem. And they were that young, they didn't know what problem they needed to solve. So they just went out there to their neighboring market, weekly market, and they saw that lots of farmers were wasting vegetables. So basically, farmers usually have enough money to transport vegetables one way to a market. But if for any reason that produce is unsold, that unsold inventory, they often do not have enough cash to carry the unsold inventory back. So it just gets dumped on the side of the road. This is true not only of India, it's true of most developing nations. Okay. And they were like, this is literally, food going down the drain. We need to figure out something about it. And from there it evolved. I don't think there's a specific hat that gets put on at that early stage. So as from the investor angle, you just need to see the team's tenacity to continue to keep the problem in sight and keep building solutions and evaluating the solution versus the problem that they've built. Like, for example, if I came to you and told you I have a fantastic solution to solve the illiteracy of every human being in India, but it involves some teacher going to their house and sitting with them 4 hours a week, it's just not scalable, right? So what are the sort of benchmarks against which you've benchmarked yourself? Is today's solution slightly better than yesterday's? So the willingness to continuously iterate, the willingness to look at multiple what impact entrepreneurs do start off with is a bit of a disadvantage, because an impact organization is also an organization first. So often you're asked, would you put profit before purpose? The answer, unfortunately, is a little bit yes, because you have to exist as an organization to stay around to solve the problem you're solving. So some amount of profit is required just to be sustainable yourself. And in that sense, profit is also a side effect. Profit is also a good sort of signal from your market that you've built something worth buying. You've built something that is actually solving a problem. But unlike a pure profit-oriented organization, an impact organization is also sort of taken on the mantle, a slightly difficult mantle of also solving a problem as well. So you do need to test for their ability to sort of stay true to themselves and keep the cause in mind.
I think it's a very good point, Anisha. So Anisha, in general, from a design perspective, right? What are some of the key insights that you're seeing right now with these startups? How are they embracing design over there when they're solutioning?
See, from a design perspective, I think the great thing that we're seeing is they're not in love with the solution that they've built. So, for example, if they find that nobody is logging in and their users are very used to WhatsApp, so instead of the user logging into your tool and checking out the dashboard, people are happy sending a screenshot of the dashboard to people's WhatsApp every morning. So I think the fact that is pretty encouraging. The second is in terms of, for example, hardware startups. We are seeing this may be an India thing. We are already a nation that likes repairing and keeping things going. You don't throw things away that early. But that whole right to repair thing, a lot of hardware startups, they spell out that this will not require repair for at least it will not require any serious maintenance beyond broad cleaning, etc. for say 5 to 6 years. That is inbuilt in the design, and it's very heartening to see that's already been thought through.
Again, sorry, yes, no, I agree with that. I think from a design perspective, this entire thought process is also evolving over here. So it's very interesting to see how founders are taking it, they're seeing these problems and are building towards that as well. Prathap, just wanted to hear your take on this in terms of the challenges focused around open innovation. Right, that's a field that you have enjoyed the most on and because advocate around, right? And open innovation fundamentally comes from design as the core itself being driven over there, right? So, what has your experience been with startups in that space?
Right. Well, we thanks. We work, of course, with tech startups, And just like as Hanisha mentioned, if you don't have a business model, you don't have impact. So the first challenge we have with in our workshops is a good portion of the startups have climate as part of their CVP, customer value proposition. Now that sounds pretty reasonable. You're a climate startup, some nature. Isn't this what people care about? Now, when you go to clients, it doesn't often turn out to be true, at least in a way that we know it's valued. So I ask normally a simple to ask question: will someone pay more? Right, and that's the first way to test whether climate is important. In fact, what we're seeing is maybe in our workshops, one of the other questions I start asking is, what's the biggest circular economy startup you can think of? Right, and it's sometimes okay, circular economy, maybe. Sometimes you get an answer. Uber, Ola. What does Uber and Ola, these startups do? They reuse existing stock for higher utilization, reducing the production of more cars for taxis. Sounds pretty circular to me, except that Uber and Ola's CVP is not based on climate or circularity. It's based on value of getting people from point A to B effectively, efficiently, like a better taxi or taxi service, I should say. So that's one of the first challenges that we face, is that there is limited funds when it comes to at least startups and impact from a grant point of view, right? Yeah. There is tremendous amount of revenue, also called funds, if you can build something that people want, and you can, of course, make it profitably. So one of our main challenges that we face, because we work with startups that come after incubation, so they've worked on the product and trying their first sales. That's our first program. And this is a mindset, especially for the initial set of startups that we saw in like 5-7 years ago. They were really climate warriors. Now we're seeing a shift of some more talent, different talent, I should say, coming into climate tech space from other startup sectors in particular, as well as industry, starting with a stronger maybe business background premise. What is if I believe something is of value to a customer, let me double check. Right? These are mistakes I used to make all the time. I've been in climate for a long time. Why don't you get it? Never gets a sale. If you're telling a client. So I think one of the things that we are seeing is that there's more awareness. I remember back then, a lot of people were, well, of course the government will give me CSR funds of some nature or some development funds, and then we'll solve air pollution. Pretty simple. I created a product. It hasn't really taken off, right? At all. I mean, outside of maybe a grant here and a pilot there, it's not a business model that is sustainable, at least in India. Maybe in Europe, you may see some richer countries. Okay, leave that aside. So we're seeing a lot more realism in business models, even in those that have a huge public good, in sustainability, that they need to identify buyers. As a result, often their product changes. Maybe they don't want to. That's a different point. But there's one thing to design for a public good, which is and different to design for a revenue model. So you want to do it for a city, you have to go to the big rich industrial groups and solve their campus problems, right? Maybe it doesn't reach your goal, so you don't do it. That's okay as well. But I guess we're seeing more that if you don't have something that sustains and creates some customer value, there's no impact. And this is where I believe a lot more effort, especially our support, even from groups like Dell, from others who can help this training and design, especially in those harder to reach SDG goals, even in climate. This would really help the next generation of entrepreneurs. I did a quick study on AI ML students last year, and we were just asking them, what do you want to do with these skills you're developing? They were still in university. And 30 to 40% said they want to do something in impact. So the talent is there. This is just about 8 or 9 universities. Talent is there. There is interest. If we can figure out how to channel, the startup format or startup ecosystem could be a great one. It's a large one. It's not easy for students to be entrepreneurs. I think we all know that from startups on the ground. But anything is not easy. That's the other lesson I learned about being in business. Doesn't matter if you're young or old. Nothing is easy because you're trying to solve something that no one has. You're going against ingrained patterns, lethargy, all these problems, whether you're young or old. So yeah, I do think design will really help a huge ton of new entrepreneurs, those trying to reach our tougher impact goals in climate and other SDGs for sure.
No, I think a very good point, Pratap. Like, so there's just one question I have, and this is very like as a founder also, right? We think about this all the time, right? You mentioned that the unit economics, the business sense has to be very strong, right? And a lot of times when you're trying to solve for an SDG goal, the unit economics will not really make sense that well, right? So, for example, let's say I am trying to build a product which is really good for the environment, but now it costs a little bit more. And my challenge is that the people who are buying it, and especially in India, the mindset is right. You always are very price competitive. That's why as a business, if I have a choice that hey, do I reduce few features and make it cheaper, then try to make a premium brand and do that. People prefer the first one because it's comparatively easier. But like I said, there's nothing easy out there. But they just in the mind they always think that price is the first point, right? Yes, Harisha, please. I know you have a perfect example over here. Please come in. Yes.
No, I mean, we really did. I mean, so we funded this clean cook stove. The designers are based out of Copenhagen. Fantastic team, ex-Siemens, understands batteries for like really well. So, and they built this thing that doesn't require maintenance for 6 years, really affordable. If you even deploy it in a country in Africa, the price of a stove like that was about as much as a family of 4 would pay for charcoal over a year. So, I mean, the point then was more around marketing innovations and business model innovations. Can we run a pay-as-you-go kind of service? Can you bring in a third party to help sort of subsidize the cost on day one and then pay them back over time? And a government can probably be the easiest person to do that, but even a third party lender could come in. So sometimes innovations are not just product process innovations. It is just like figuring out, okay, fine, you pay me about as much as you pay weekly for charcoal, right? And we'll make it happen. Another possible solution is to figure out other kinds of like freemium models. Again, or an app that allows me to track child malnutrition in like sub-equatorial Africa is equally valid for a parent in New York or Bombay or Tokyo. Can I sell it there and then subsidize? So like for every subscription sold in a first world country, I can probably subsidize 2 subscriptions in a developing country. So eventually, I mean, like we will have to think along those
lines. Agreed on that. I think I think that's the challenge over here, and that's the way the corporates and the founders have to build it. Right?
Again, another example. Sorry to jump in. So to Pratap's point about do people want to pay more for climate? Similarly, in nutrition, do people want to pay more for nutrition? The clear answer we got across like multiple focus group studies, everything. So, for example, if I asked a parent, do you believe that fortified flour is better for your child? The answer is yes. Would you pay 1 rupee per kg more for fortified flour? The answer is no. So, one startup that we funded in Africa subsidized the cost of fortification by going to millers. They built an IoT device that could be put on a milling machine, on a girni, and you could basically put in the vitamin premix into that machine. It's an IoT based device. Vodafone has given it some grants, etc., etc. And so where does the miller sort of make the delta? So millers in that country sell their flour in certain bags. So because small millers buy those bags retail, so they pay retail price for like if I want to buy 5 bags a day. So this company said, we'll give you nicely branded bags, different from the other millers, but you have to buy them from us. And the only way you get the nicely colored bag is if you put this box on your this thing. So so they bought the bags wholesale, sold them retail, and in the delta they managed to even factor in the cost of the vitamin premix. So you do have to play around. I mean, it has to be extremely creative with margins being low.
I was just looking at something as Anisha was speaking, because when we look at climate, for example, who causes our CO2 rises, or who causes the plastic waste problem. India is a large country, and you'll see a large chunk is the middle class, especially upper middle class poor. You'll see a huge skew. I'll give you an example of a startup. Now, there's a startup called Book and Bloom. They were taking these, flowers from temples and bananas that's normally thrown in the river, and making fertilizer, standard kind of. We've seen this model before. They were having trouble selling it to farmers, right? Because farmers cost conscious, low margins. This is not a big fertilizer company, so obviously not cost competitive. They realized they were not selling fertilizer. They were selling something else. In this case, it wasn't climate or sustainability. It was spirituality. It came from bananas. They started selling in up to upper middle class terrace gardens at 5 or 7 times the price, and they found a model. Now, my point here is that, wouldn't it be nicer if we can find a solution that could go to farmers? Yeah, of course. But there's many solutions we could devise, many business models that don't have to start talking about the all of India, right? Especially when we know I think a significant portion of our actual consumption, private consumption, comes from middle class India in cities, right? And concomitantly, the GHGs as well as the plastic waste comes from the same group. So I think that I've seen examples we have that where water bottles are priced high, and people will pay more. They may not pay more, in example, Hanisha, but they'll pay more for things that seemingly are good for them, right? Leaving aside whatever we think of plastic water bottles. I think there's many opportunities when we stop thinking about India as this homogenous, huge country that needs to be serviced, and just think of the thousands or tens of thousands of businesses. As long as we move away from the VC world, the opportunities open to how many nice niche, good mid-sized sustainable businesses that can come up that can help solve these problems. Maybe in certain cases, of course, you need nationwide economies of scale and VC capital, and then you have other questions on mass market and premiums. But that's not the whole story when we're talking about green entrepreneurship or green business to achieve our SDG goals. So I think, it's complicated world out there, but I think space for lots of different ways to innovate.
I think just to add over there, right? One thing which we have seen practically also there is that when you're working in this space, when you're working on SDG, and you want to get the right partners, or even like there are people who care about it, right? But there's also a need to communicate with them in that way, right? I think along with designing a good product, designing a very good communication is equally very important, right? People do buy a same biscuit for 5 rupees and for 50 rupees, right? It's the exact same thing, just different packaging to it, right? And people don't think much about it. Similar example of pool and every other ventures over there. I think very important is that how are you positioning your product? What is that value that you're creating? How are you showcasing it to the right people? Become very important. I think that's where when you go down and understand their customers and their needs and then talk about it, I think that becomes important. Prathap had something to add, yes.
Yeah. I just want to add one thing is from what I just heard is kind of cool. I was in this small little market here in Bombay a couple of years ago, and this young entrepreneur was selling some organic spices or something. I can't remember. It was like one of these small in Bandar West, these mini kind of makeshift markets. So I said, great. She was telling about the benefits of how she's selecting farmers, how they're going pesticide free or whatever the positive benefits or approaches. So I said, I'll buy it. Great. Okay. I knew the price. It was expensive. I'm closer to upper middle class. I'll buy it. And I was about to take my money out, and she then turns to me and says, I can give you a discount. Now I'm thinking, you made the sale. I actually am a customer. Leave aside whether it's big enough for her growth and all, but I am a customer. But this is instinct for us as well, to almost think cost is everything, right? Because we have examples plenty in India in consumption where the same product or practically the same, whether for status or anything else, people will buy differently. And you're right. If we start thinking about one is how to communicate it, and two, identifying those customers who may see that there's lots of these niches that can be serviced profitably.
No, totally. But I think, Pratap, you also point right earlier. When we look at founders, I think it's not just about the problem, right? Eventually, even if it's SDG goals, sustainability is important even for the venture at the core, right? If the core team is not able to sell things off, right, to the point, they may not earn very huge margins. But even if you want to create an impact, the impact is impactful when it reaches the mass, right? And I think that's what we want to look at founders, right? Hey, the founders have the hustle, they have the potential that what they are thinking, how are they thinking? Are they able to execute some of that, right? Their product will evolve, their communication will evolve, their journey will evolve, but are they able to at least tick the box in all these areas to then go ahead with that? Pradeep, I know we have you silent for some while. You have
I
that
would actually want to come in now. Maybe Pradeep. I think we have. I mean, just want to be conscious of time, so wanted to cover a very important part of our conversation is. See, we are doing the Designathon challenge later this month. And this question is for all of you. I'll come to each one of you as we go along. So, Pradeep, first you, what do you, I mean, in your personal capacity, what do you feel, when a challenge like this comes up? What are your thoughts? How important it is, or does it, necessarily create that dent and the objectives that, the organizers are trying to do? What has been your experience around that?
No, like, see, these are all very important and very critical, and it really, really makes a big difference to the people who participate and as well as the people who organize it, right? So one of the things that which we have seen is like, we used to run something called as Opportunity Hackathon, which we still run at like, our people used to run something called as Opportunity Hackathon. You won't believe, like, 6 years back, we had the son of an employee was part of that hackathon, right? And 6 years later, actually, he has, like, finished his internship, and then, like, at that point of time, he was a school kid. Now he has come back, and then he has joined PayPal as an internship in the US. So it's been 6 years, but, like, he still remembers it, and then we still do remember it, right? Like, young age and the young mind, he was able to be part of the hackathon and then do it. And the other thing that which we have also seen is many people do get excited about it. They do come and then do this, and then kind of pick and then choose this as an their kind of, very important part of their life or part of their professional career, and then they kind of go and then build it. And most of the times, it also kind of creates a lot of awareness among the people, which I think makes a big difference, because most of the time, what, we don't even know, like, what it is and things like that. So creating the awareness, that makes a big difference. And the networks that gets built as a result of all these things makes a big difference. And for some people, it really becomes a very big um, and very important milestone for the game changers, is also something that which we have seen. I'm sure, like, the others would have seen different such examples, but these are all like, it kind of makes you feel good that, you kind of created or you kind of contributed to someone making a big difference, or at least a small part in the big things that they would eventually go on to do, right? So sometimes it starts small with this kind of events, but eventually they find its own way, and then they eventually become big. But this kind of serves as a spark for them to do that, right? So that way, I think this is kudos to all the folks who are doing it and then making it happen, both for the participant and as well as for the organizers, right? So I think it's very important, is the way that how I think about it. The bigger challenge that I've seen is, say, how do you ensure that it becomes sustainable, right? Like, again, the sustainability is a key, as people are saying. It's not only for the environment, for the other goals, and for the companies, and even for the events like this, and as well as the output or the deliverables that comes out of it, right? Like, how do you kind of sustain? That is always a challenge, but I don't think we should worry about, like, what, like, if there are 100 people working on it and 10 come out of it, like, maybe two or three see the light of the day and end of the day and then sustains it. And in my opinion, I used to think when I started earlier, oh, it's just the, like, 2% or 3% coming out of it. Is it really good or is it really bad? But that two or three, like, sometimes brings on a big impact that is kind of a good enough. So I think it is very, very important not to worry about, is it like 2%, 3%, or is it kind of good enough? I think it's important to shut that down mindset, and then, like, think that it is going to kind of create impact, and then keep doing it in a consistent manner again and again, and then see, like, okay, how could we kind of push this two or three to five or six, right? Not necessarily all the 100 needs to go on big. Can this two or three become six, and from six not again 12, right? Like, we can start doing it in small steps, like 6 to 8 and all that. I think if you're again being very conscious about making small tweaks here and there to ensure that this tribe grows up, I think that should be kind of good enough is the way that how I think about it. Hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, Pradeep, thank you so much. It just encourages us, who are trying to create this. And just to, give you the context, this is something first time at Dell we are experimenting, especially for the startup community. So we are nervous, we are excited also at the same time. So, so I just thought that, I mean, just want to validate what we are trying to do. And yes, I do take back that feedback that, how do we make it more sustainable, and uh, how do we go from 3 to 6 and then multiply that. Hanisha, your thoughts, what do you think, a platform of this nature, I'm not necessarily Dell, but if any innovation challenge, what what have you seen, and what changes have you seen, and what is your experience?
Right. See, like Pradeep said, literally this is published data. CMU has published like something like under 5% of all innovations showcased at hackathons that go on to become real products. So maybe sort of step one is yes, and some of this perspective is coming. I'm actually, as we speak, remotely organizing a hackathon in the Solomon Islands on behalf
Oh,
of
wow.
an agency. So a lot of this is like literally documents I've been sending to the team on the ground, saying, okay, don't expect the sun, moon, and the stars. Don't expect that the winning team will suddenly drop everything that they have and start working on this solution from the day you give them the prize money and stuff like that. But apart from that, the main thing is to realize that these people were committed enough to come. Now, what can we do in terms of as community managers to keep that spark going? What can we do? The hackathon is one event, but you have these people's details. These people have taken the time to be connected to you. What else can be done pre and post to keep them connected? Because they've both shown an inclination to solving the problem and speaking to a brand like that. So how can that be taken further? And that sense of community, that sense of sort of team spirit, how can that be fostered a little further? Especially with teams that are being formed like last minute on the day of the event, often that is a bit of a challenge more than anything else. So if you get teams that have already built something, often you will see that hackathon winners are people who have already been working on the problem for a certain amount of time. So another part of it is pre-event outreach to reaching out to such teams to encourage them to participate, so that they also, if other people know that okay, a team of this caliber is participating, your participant profile will also get raised, and you will get a meaningful set of solutions at the end of it.
Hmm. Um, Pratap, what do you have to say? You yourself have been doing hackathons like Hanisha. Um, so, some learnings from you.
Oh yeah, yeah. In fact, we're about to launch maybe on Tuesday a circular economy and data hackathon for university students, and it's something that we think is going to be a real fit for lots of, especially university students, when you play around with data and impact. Some of the kind of informal research we did earlier as well. Um, what Hanisha is saying is right. These are hard formats to lead to results for many reasons. But for those, it could be a great way to discover talent or discover motivation. you know, I mean, sometimes we have unrealistic goals. In our programs, students almost never do well, and that's something that doesn't mean we shouldn't support it. It means that there is a challenge to develop. You have to. You don't have the networks as someone with it coming from industry. You probably don't have a business background, etc. But you have something that older people don't have is you can take risks and you can think differently. There's a reason why, like my ex-wife was at to the big MNCs in finance. They could never compete against these young kids in fintech. They had better resumes, more money, 2 orders of magnitude more money on every product. Just could not. So I think one of the goals here is both, of course, skilling in these kind of hackathons and programs, and maybe other things that Dell is going to do to really support this ecosystem around design. But the other one is to really also help find that talent. Being an entrepreneur is just it's a role. It's not the only role. Some people going to have amazing careers with these skills in their jobs. There's a value in building these skills amongst a wider set of younger people coming out, not just for startups or entrepreneurs. Yeah.
Thanks, Pratap. Taha, what do you have to say? You've been ecosystem enabler yourself, through Headstart, and you have done multiple such things. But how, what has been your experience? Do you see some of these solutions taking the light, and I mean, what really should be taken care of? I mean, it's actually two-way, is what I think. While we give the platform, but the onus equally is on the teams also, to make sure that they take it up once the challenge is over. So, what do you have to say on that?
So I think one, these challenges are great to at least get the thought process started, right? Like Manisha said that we may have 5% of people who are eventually taking that into a venture, but I'm sure there will be a lot more. I don't have the number over there, but a lot more of people for whom this hackathon became the initiation point, right? And I think that's a very important point for us to understand. We want people, especially when it comes to SDG, it's still a very big gap in terms of how many people are still talking about it. That number is very very small, right? The more we do these events, the more we do these hackathons, right? I think the reason why I like hackathons more than just a session is that is what makes them go think deeper and realize and learn and then share forward, right? I think the more and that 24 hours, the time that they are spending solving that problem helps them in multiple forms, right? But one form it certainly brings them closer is to really understand the core reasons or the values that they are working at the beginning of us, right? Which basically, either them doing it or them just talking about it to other people may start more things up, right? And I think so. While I also totally agree with the points mentioned in terms of what is forward for them, right? But we should also just stop and appreciate people coming and doing it, because I think that itself is a very big thing, right? And beyond that, I think what we are also trying to build is not that hey, you have built a solution, let's take that forward, right? It's that mindset that they're building on, right? They are trying to bring in the mindset of, hey, one, how do I solve for social problems? How do I solve for SG problems? How do I bring the design concept, right? I'm also building that vision. They want to meet so many jury members, so many mentors over there, right? I think it is all of this entire thing that they want to take forward, right? How do we give them a community? How, like, more than just saying, hey, you need to do this, do what you do, but can you create an impact? Can you now go and talk about this to 10 more people, right? Create more awareness, let people know more about these things. And if of these 10, even one becomes a venture, I think that's a great success story. But the remaining 9, if they just go and talk about this, I think that's still a very great start. And that's how the communities are formed, right? I think all of us over here are part of some of the other communities. We have been part of it. And I think every community starts from that initial part of it. But then when people look back and they say that, you know what, these things have been the reasons for us to be here. I have learned a lot and now I'm going back. And I think these hackathons should be that way of making people think, maybe people understand, and they take their first step, even just talking about it. I think that's a great win for us.
Yeah, I think very encouraging thoughts coming in, from all four panelists. So we also were on the same track, when we started to conceptualize this. Just to give you a little background, Designathon as a platform was first targeted towards the design community when it began in 2017, and after 3 editions, and then COVID hit, then we had to pause it, and then we are reviving the platform again. And this time, we thought of s- taking this platform to the startup community. So these are, I think, this is an experiment which we want to pursue, and the idea in the long run is to, I mean, we are still thinking around it. We want to take it to maybe like a regional format, or it could be in multiple cities. Doing more shorter formats of it, and taking it to more and more people as you go along. And since this was the first time we are doing it, we just wanted to keep it intact in a way that it allows us also, to execute it in the most basic way possible for us to do. So that's a bit about how we are taking this forward. I would now like to, prompt the if they, if any attendee has any specific questions that I could take up with the, the panelists, and it would be great if you could mention which panelist you would want to pose the question to. It will help us get a more targeted and a focused response. There are some questions here. Let me just read them through and try to see if we could take some of them. Okay, so questions which I see currently in the chat, I think broadly we have covered them, in our conversations. And if there are any more that are coming in, please let us know. Else, I think we are still open, not just today, but till the time we are organizing this designathon. So we are very active on social media. Please reach out to us. The Headstart team is also helping us on ground to execute this. So you could reach out to them as well for any specific questions. I see some questions in the chat regarding the designathon challenge that we would take offline, and we'll share details about that. I think our website is very, very elaborate uh, on that front, so don't want to, consume time on that. Yes, so I think I have exhausted my list of questions, but just as a closing comments, maybe, if I could encourage each one of you to share maybe a couple of lines, starting with you, Hanisha, if you have any closing comments or thoughts.
I'll just probably reiterate what I already said. I mean, especially the SDGs can sound very, very massive, very daunting. The latest numbers currently put at least Asia's ability. So the SDGs, the original target for the SDGs was 2030. The nearest estimate right now is about 2075. Somebody says 2066, whatever it is. They sound very massive and daunting. Don't try to eat the whole mountain at one go. Pick a problem, start small, move fast, build a solution, iterate. Find someone to buy that solution and move. I mean, like the key point is to start. That's all. I mean, like, don't let the problem phase you. That's what I would say.
Anisha, I completely agree with you. Just I think a week ago, I was reading a World Economic Forum report around global gender gap. So inclusion, gender diversity is one of our tracks. So I just wanted to get some, um, insights as to what is happening. So I mean, just going through that report was so overwhelming, and the problem and the scalability of the issue. So I do understand where you're coming from. It is very, very daunting. So I think the the startups that are registering with us, I think I think the first step that these guys have taken to just think and participate is, I think, very appreciable, and we will make sure that we could take them to the next level post our competition. So I completely resonate with that, Hanisha. Thank you so much to bring that up. Uh, Pradeep, last thoughts, closing comments.
Sure. Once again, thanks a lot, and great job in organizing this. Good that you're doing it, and I'm really hoping that people also find it much more useful, and then they participate, and then this becomes a huge success, and it becomes sustainable for the forthcoming years as well. Yeah, that's the one
Thanks.
thing I would
Thanks,
want to say.
Pradeep.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the encouraging words. Taha, what do you have to say?
No, I think first, thank you for doing it. I think it's all the teams who are applying. I think it's going to be a great experience for them. And second, I keep telling founders one thing, right? Always, don't focus or get fixed on the solution, but the problem. I think that's one beauty about SDG is that the problem that you take up in SDG has such a big impact that there's a very good surety that if you get sit it with that problem, you'll figure out amazing solution around it, right? So any team who is coming up, when they're coming up in this cohort or others as well, right? Always see the opportunities in the problem. Love the problem. I think the solution is a journey itself. It will keep evolving in the time.
Thanks, Saha. Pratap, before I ask you for closing comments, there's one question which I feel you could do justice to if you could address that. So, an attendee is asking that, what are the hardest challenges for any non-Indian entrepreneur, to enter India as a market and try to address some SDG issues. So, do you have any thoughts on that? What have you seen as somebody in that space?
Right, right. I mean, I've been here for about 22 years, so I feel I think more like I don't remember what it was like coming to India. It was too long ago. It was most of my adult career. What I do believe, and this is the heart of what we believe at Climate Collective, though, is that you have two types, and I'll talk about technology. You have two types of technology and innovation. One is really strong deep tech R&D. That is something deep material science, advanced material science. I mean, it can happen anywhere because we can benefit from that across the world. The next one is adoption. It may involve business model innovation, financing. I strongly believe that local entrepreneurs have huge advantages here. It's very hard to cross any border. Forget about coming to India. Going from France to Germany is a tough cross. There's many reasons for it. I mean, to understand your customer, to have that kind of network and speed to put a team together, the right team together. These are all challenges. I don't mean to be discouraging. That's not the point. The point is that leap is quite big. I've seen good entrepreneurs tell me. There's this one in Lisbon that it was from a request from the largest textile giant from Sri Lanka for their product. They came back and sent a message to me saying, "Well, we're very honored, but we're still trying to solve Portugal. And when we get strong enough, we'd be more than happy because that's such an amazing client." So the opportunities are there because climate in particular affects all of us, and sometimes in similar ways from in terms of technology usefulness or impact. I would say if you're coming to India, do it slow, find partners. It's not an easy country, but crossing any border is not easy. Yeah.
Thank you.
And
And any closing comments for
no,
us?
I think everyone's said quite exactly what I feel. Hanish was talking about how sometimes this problem looks so huge. SDG goals may take forever, starting a little bit one by one. I normally end this quote when I speak on innovation. For daunting tasks, things that look like it's urgent, like climate change in my case, etc. It comes from ex-President Lincoln. The best way to predict the future is to create it. So I do hope that even though it's daunting, our goal is not to just acknowledge that, but just take steps to create what we need, the world that we need.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Really hit me, there, Pradap. Thank you so much. Very, very encouraging. And Taha, Pradeep, Hanisha, thank you so much, for joining us for this session. I hope you, as individuals, also found it valuable, as is for us as well, because we are just 2 weeks away from doing our first ever designathon for startups. So um, we are on our feet to make sure that this is done in the best way possible. Keeping all interests in mind. For me personally, I think having the opportunity created for founders and innovators to come on board and do some disruptions is something which I'm looking forward to. And yes, we'll stay in touch. I think all of us are connected, and would encourage the attendees and also the people who will be viewing this video when we are posting this online, to just go through it. Let us know if you need any more details, and we are there until the 25th, to make sure that you get all your responses. And yes, looking forward to some amazing applications coming in, and very excited to execute this innovation challenge focused on uh, design. So thank you all. I think we will close now the session, and thank you all for the encouraging words in the end.
Thanks, Rahul. Thank you
All
for
right.
having us.
Thank you,
All right.
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
everybody.
everyone. Yeah.
Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.
Thanks, Rahul.
Bye
Bye.
bye.